Hello everyone, this is Many Ninjas, and much like I mentioned in the previous bootleg breakdown, I actually got two figures at the same time, and the second one I picked up was actually the newest bootleg of Son Goku, a Saiyan raised on Earth here. Of course, the fake one is on the left in this video, and the real one is on the right, which is glaringly obvious when you notice the one on the left is missing all the copyright information, and assorted logos from the Tenachi Nations, the DBC logo itself, and of course Bandai and Funimation. Of course, the Funimation warning stickers were added on after the fact, but once you get past that point, technically print-wise and even the cropping-wise, they're actually fairly similar for the most part. If anything, I'd say the colors on the bootleg box are a little bit faded, but generally speaking, other than that and maybe some contrast issues, they're pretty close on, which is what you expect at this point from the assorted bootlegs and whoever set these up. Even looking at the actual print quality, we're kind of zooming in. Of course, this one is first the bootleg one. The quality of the text and everything is nice and sharp in this case. Everything's still really well handled, really well detailed, which is a nice refreshing case. And here's the right for the contrast. Of course, the Bluefin distributor logo and stickers on top of that, but otherwise, generally speaking, they're about the same, other than the stuff at the very front of the box. So if you're looking for something kind of a fill-in if something have the original box, well, technically it does the job. Oh, actually, one second, there is a bit of a difference, I might add. The sticker on the side is a bit off. It's actually a bit thicker on the fake one in terms of the font size. But that pretty much covers the box for the most part. What is the most important part is what's on the inside. So we need to get this thing open. Even looking just casually through the window there, I can see there's some stuff that's going to be off, but we need to take a better look to see exactly what's going on in there. And of course that only means one thing, take the knife to it. As usual, when you open these up, of course, you have like the little film of plastic between the figure and the casing itself. You don't have the little individual pieces of plastic between the joints, like what you would expect from the real release. To kind of help protect it during travel, to my understanding, that's what it's supposed to be used for. And of course those are never going to be found on the bootleg. That takes a little more effort than the bootleg factories are willing to take. And in this case I'm saying bootleg factory because I don't believe this one is actually based off a factory reject for reasons I'm about to explain. As soon as I can get this open. They actually taped all sides here. There we go. For starters, this is a bit of an inauspicious part. You notice the bangs on the head are completely knocked off. They didn't exactly survive the transport, and even looking at this, yeah, there goes the bangs. Ooh, that's a bit of a loose neck there, folks. And yep, it's gonna be one of those kind of reviews, isn't it, folks? Trying to patch this thing together. What I will actually note is the fittings on this figure, unlike the Match of Data, are actually surprisingly tighter, if anything. And in the case of that one arm, the right arm there, it's too tight, in fact. It doesn't fit in properly. You try to move it around, it comes right back off. So we're going to do parts of the review without that. And yeah, as you can see, it's not a standard joint by any means. In fact, worth mentioning, yes, that shoulder is completely orange, the same color as the gi in this case. The little gi sleeve comes right off. And even while trying to take that off, it's an extremely snug fit. It doesn't want to go on there. If anything, the peg may be a little bent in my personal figure's case. Might be fine on other ones, but generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend finding out in this case for stuff I'm going to elaborate on as I try to muscle this arm back into place. Oh, speaking of the shoulder and other joints for that matter, as you can see, the ankle joint is clearly off. It's sticking out like a sore thumb, and it's also a skin-based or a skin-colored joint. So that same issue with the Match of Vegeta. Joint-wise, not counting the hair, of course, everything else is actually a pretty stiff, good fit. And just to kind of illustrate, here's the bangs in this case. The reason it's not fitting in is because the tabs are bent outward on both angles. They're supposed to be straight, but, well, it's not a very well casted figure. Try to force that back in as best as possible, but it's something where if you heat it up, you can probably get it into place properly, but it's still, right out of the box, it's a bit of a mess. Speaking of things that are a bit of a mess, the joint allowances are, especially around the hips, a bit of a mess. The torso doesn't want to move too much on the upper torso. The lower torso isn't really moving at all. We have another case, just like the Manta Vendita. It looks like there's supposed to be a seam there for the for kind of the 2.0 articulation, but just like that, it's fake. Everything's falling out because it's still using kind of the rotating joint from the 1.0, so if you were hoping to use something for fodder for 2.0 stuff, well, this is not the figure for it, because these legs are just... they're just useless in this case for that part. The hips are completely wrong. And looking a little closer, might be a little hard to see in the camera here with the glare, but there's a lot of casting issues I find. In this case, a lot of really rough spots where you can tell things weren't removed from the molds properly. And considering how that appears on a lot of the figure, especially with the hips and stuff, I'm inclined to believe a lot of the pieces here are in fact recasted versions of the original molds rather than factory rejects. Which is a pity, because otherwise there are certain parts on here like the knees and other bits which are normally problem fits for other figures that are actually nice and tight. And the elbows, they have a little work, but they're nice and tight. But, well, so let's stand the two side by side. You can kind of see my point. The figure is actually taller than the real thing because of those sort of joining issues I was mentioning there. Because everything is casted slightly off. Another thing I'll bring up while I'm here and zooming in, there's definite paint app issues. Namely, the boots clearly show that the yellow lining is off kilter. Is also using a much weaker ink, in this case, or paint job. Same thing with the red in this case. In terms of the figure as a whole, everything except for the odd parts that have paint, or like the decals, which are actually a bit too thick in terms of the lining, is all a matte kind of semi-gloss finish. There's no real paint apps, so to speak, on the bootleg. And yeah, everything kind of stands off. And I'm bringing up a set of electronic calipers because there was something about the hips that were... visually, the hips look off in this case. It's like they're smaller, just slightly. So we're going to check the calipers measurement on the real figure in this case, kind of figure out where the inseam should be, how things are supposed to be sized. So 1 second, let's confirm that. 23 1/18. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's basically 23 millimeters, a little over that. And if we do the same comparison with the bootleg, there goes the arm again. It looks like it's actually a smidge smaller, which really leads me to believe that, yeah, these things are actually recasted versions of the figure rather than a factory reject or something using the original mold. And yet, just below 22 millimeters, yeah, everything's just slightly off. That kind of confirms my suspicion. Even kind of looking at certain limbs, like the arm seems slightly thinner, the upper torso is slightly smaller. The hips are a giveaway. That's, well, you can tell that one's recasted just because it's one piece rather than three separate pieces like the original. And if we look up at the heads, aside from some face features, yeah, no, even the heads are slightly smaller on the bootleg. The hair is definitely notably smaller when we look at it this way. And of course the mouth painting is a bit rough on there. Huh. Hadn't noticed that part originally. Doing a bit of a jump cut here because I wanted to help emphasize something on the hands. For the most part, they're nothing special to talk about, but this kind of confirms what I've been saying all along. The softer details and slightly smaller size of the bootleg hands, of course on the left, because you can tell it's off the figure, kind of confirm what I've been thinking all along, that this particular bootleg, the Saiyan Rays on Earth, is in fact a series of recasted bits, which explain why all the allowances are slightly off and they're kind of lower on detail. And speaking of detailing, we're now going to take a look at the heads here. Top row are the bootlegs, bottom row are the real figure faces in this case. Surprisingly, the decals for the eyes are, other than being slightly offset in some cases, they're surprisingly well handled. Even down to the point where you have this slightly brownish kind of a line work around the eyes, the white of the eyes themselves. That's present on both the bootlegs and the real figure. If it wasn't for like the eyebrow mark being slightly off, then they'd actually be really well handled on the faces. Although, speaking of faces, as you can see, the top row has a slightly different expression on that third face. It's supposed to be the sidewise glance, but when they were setting it up, someone got that wrong in the factory notes, so it's technically a different face. And in this case, we're looking at the back of the faces here. I just kind of want to really hammer on the point that the faces, along with a lot of other things, are recasted bits clearly because they're slightly off in size, slightly smaller if anything. and even the pegs on the back are slightly smaller. What does that mean? You could probably get away with doctoring the faces in order to fit them on the real figure, but they're probably going to be fitting a little loose until you put the bangs on it to really kind of help keep them in place. But if you want something to kind of make and customize some extra expressions for the Saiyan Raised on Earth Goku, I suppose you could do that in this case. And speaking of the head, looking one more time, you can kind of see it's kind of a really rough casting on the back of the head there. And of course the neck joint is just a bit too small for the job, so that explains why it's not fitting in properly and it's kind of loose. But putting a new face on here, we can see the new alternate faces do fit on well. That is a problem I've had with other bootleg figures in the past. And once you kind of bend the pegs of the hair into place, and the bangs specifically, you have to kind of really curve it inward. It will fit on the face pretty flush, which is something I haven't had on the most of this video, so just demonstrating, yes, it can be done, and when you do get it on there properly, it will look alright. Although, once again, the hair is slightly smaller than the real deal. Alright, now for the final verdict of the figure, to answer some questions. Namely, should you get this figure? No. Is this bootleg even good for fodder? Not necessarily, with all the varying sizing issues that they have there and casting issues from being recasted. What you should really do here? Spend the extra $15, just get the real Saiyan Raised on Earth, since it's still readily available in a lot of places and online, and just forget about this bootleg. Maybe if they come back and make a proper kind of rendition of it, maybe it might be worth considering, but if you see anything with orange shoulders and all that stuff, just leave that auction, leave that AliExpress thing, and just save your money, get the real thing. And that's all I gotta say for now, folks. Thanks for watching. Catch y'all later.